Tonight we want to ask and answer the question, why should I believe in evolution? Why should I believe in evolution? It is, of course, my contention, I'm sure it is yours as well, that we should not believe in evolution. And yet our world, in large measure, says that we should. In fact, evolution is a foregone conclusion as far as the majority of people around us are concerned. Stephen Jay Gould, a famous evolutionist who died in 2002, who was known as one of their best apologists, said evolution is a fact, like apples falling from trees. And so evolution is as much of a fact as gravitation is, he would suggest to us. Back in 1944, W.W. Howells, who also was an evolutionist, commented that evolution is a fact like digestion. In other words, it's another process just as legitimate, just as true, just as well known as what that digestive system is within our body, that process. And our world generally looks at it that way. We as Christians stand out in our world as not accepting this which others so readily seem to accept. Why should we believe in evolution? Why do those around us believe in evolution? Those are questions that we ought to consider. And we want to consider some of the evidences that are given for evolution. Evidences that have been found, still many of them are found, in our children's textbooks. And we want to see that they are in fact not evidences at all, but they continue to be put forth as if they are. They continue to persuade individuals of the legitimacy of evolution. Now, the first one I want to suggest is Ernest Haeckel's drawings of the embryos. No doubt if you can think back to the years when you were in school, you probably remember seeing these drawings in a textbook. Now, these are drawings of different animals at very early stages in their development. In this list, we have a fish, we have a salamander, we have a turtle, we have a bird, we have a pig, and we have a human. And the point of this was to suggest the similarities that exist between each of these animals in its development. Now, the idea behind that Haeckel had was ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Now, you say, what does that mean? Well, I had to look it up too, because it doesn't make much sense to us. But the idea behind it is this, that the human being in his development reflects the whole evolutionary process. In other words, it was contended that if you look at the human embryo at various stages, you are seeing a recreation, if you will, of the whole process of evolution. And so if we could just examine the embryo, then we can see how man evolved. We're seeing a picture of evolution from something very small and very simple to something as complicated as what man is. And so this was considered to be an early evidence for evolution. Now, we know today that Haeckel did not actually give us true-to-life drawings of the embryos of these various animals, but rather he doctored up the drawings. He was a well-known artist, very capable artist, and so he had the ability to do this, and he did that. He doctored them up to suit his purposes because he wanted it to show something, and so he drew it in such a way that it demonstrated that. Now, later on, it was found that these drawings were not real. They were faked. He had made it appear in a way that it was not in fact. In fact, he was tried by his peers on the charges of fraud. Now, the interesting thing about this is, those that are in the field of biology today, they know that this is a fake. They know it's a fraud. They know it isn't true. And yet it continues to be in textbooks, largely in America and Britain. Now, why does it continue to be in our textbooks if we know it's a fraud? If we know it isn't true. If we know that He drew something that really isn't the way it is. Why does it continue to be there? And there are some reasons why it continues to be there. But one of the things that I want to suggest to you is found in Brad Harab's book, Convicted. And it was written by a Canadian author who knew that this was not true. He knew that this was something that was created. He knew that Heichel did not really draw this. But his contention was, it's a very interesting contention, is even though it's not true, it pictures what we know really happened. You see, we know that Heichel came up with this. We know that he pictured something that doesn't really exist, and he shouldn't have done that, but you see, he was just overzealous for the cause of evolution. He was simply picturing what we know really happens, and so what's the harm in us still presenting it that way? And his basic contention is when children get old enough, they can discern the truth from error. They can figure this out for themselves. Imagine that. One of these days, they'll know it's not true. And so we'll just keep putting it out there because it portrays something that we believe really happened that way, even though we don't have evidence that it happened that way. Do you really think one day that if our children are taught this year after year after year, if these images are presented to them as truth, as facts, by those that they respect, by those that are their teachers, that one of these days a light's just going to go off and they are going to say, oh, this was just made up. This isn't real after all. And it'll go away like certain other things that they heard about during childhood. We really believe that's the case? Or are we allowing the evolutionists to plant things in the minds of our children that never will be removed? That we never will get out? They will continue to see these images and accept them as truth, even though they, even by scientists, are known to be doctored, known to be untrue. But consider a second evidence of this, and that's the peppered moths. I can remember when I was in school, I can remember seeing a picture of two moths on the trunk of a tree. One was black, one was white. The tree was white. The black one was easy to pick out. The white one was more difficult to pick out. But though he was spotted a little bit, you could still pick him out on the white tree. You remember the explanation that was given for that? You see, prior to the Industrial Revolution, we're told, that most of these moths in England were white. But following the Industrial Revolution, because of the pollution and because of the soot that went up into the air, the trees became darker, and so what happened is the moths had to evolve in order to survive, and so they became darker, so they could blend in better with the tree. Because it was too easy for a bird to pick out a black moth on a white tree, and it was too easy for a bird to pick out a white moth on a black tree, and so this evolution had to take place in order for these moths to survive. And so there it is. It's proof of survival of the fittest. It's proof of evolution. That's what we're told. Well, there's some problems with that. Those who have studied these moths, they studied them for over 40 years. They only found one example of where they ever saw two moths on the trunk of a tree like this. This has not been able to be recreated. We've not seen this demonstrated again. And so people began to question these two moths, black and white, on the trunk of a tree, broad daylight, such a clear picture, such an obvious picture. And you know what has been discovered? That was staged. Those two moths were placed on that tree, maybe glued there, maybe pinned there, maybe in some other way kept there. What we found out about these moths is these moths are night flyers. They don't fly in the daytime at all. What we found out about these moths is that, yes, they do have the ability to adapt somewhat in color. But at the end of the day, guess what they still are? They didn't become a bird. They didn't become a cat. They didn't become a human. They didn't develop even into another kind of insect. You know what they were at the end of the day? Moths. Same thing they were at the beginning. Did they get darker? Perhaps they did. Perhaps they didn't. But would that not show evidence of design? Would that not show that a designer designed them to be able to camouflage them in a certain environment in order to survive? Would that be proof of evolution? Proof of evolution would be if they had changed into something else. We're not talking about changes within the same kind. We're not talking about becoming a little bit darker over the course of time. We're not talking about camouflage. We're talking about a moth becoming something other than a moth. We're talking about a monkey becoming something other than a monkey. We're talking about a fish becoming an amphibian becoming a snake becoming a bird becoming a mammal becoming a man. That's what we're talking about when we talk about evolution. We're not talking about changes within a given kind. That certainly falls within the realm of possibility. But let's consider something else. Let's consider vestigial organs. These organs, we were told in 1931 by German scientist Wiedersheim that there were 180 organs in the human body that were really unnecessary. They were there because at an earlier stage of development they were needed. Our ancestors needed these organs. They remain in our body today, but they really don't serve a function for us. They don't serve a purpose for us. They're just leftovers from the evolution that's taken place in the past. Well, think about this. Think about what is being said about these organs. Now, here are some of the things that are routinely listed on this list of organs that are unnecessary. The tonsils, the appendix, the adenoids, the wisdom teeth, ear muscles that allow some people to be able to wiggle their ears, body hair. All those things they're not necessary. They're just left over from former days. They're left over from whoever we evolved from. But we don't really need them. Well, it's interesting that the more that we learn about the human body, the more we realize that these things that we thought didn't have a purpose, didn't have a function, do have a purpose. They have a function after all. The appendix is an example of that. The appendix serves in our immune system. We don't know fully what it does, but we know that along with the tonsils, it is a part of our immune, our body's defense system. So you don't want to be without it. You can live without it if you have to, but you don't really want to be without it because it serves a purpose. In fact, the truth of the matter is there's no vestigial organs in the human body. Every organ we have, God meant for us to have. And it has a purpose. And so let me suggest to you, don't go letting someone cut off the organs of your body. Even if they tell you you don't need them, they're not important. Hold on to them. Because just give us enough time and we may discover that there is a purpose for them and you did need them after all. So don't get rid of them. You're going to need them. It's interesting if we go back to this day and age, what if somebody had said, okay, I've got all these organs I don't need, get rid of them. I'm carrying around a whole lot of weight. They're taking up a whole lot of space. I don't need them. Think of all the things that would have been gotten rid of had that been the case. But they have purposes. They serve as a purpose. They're not evidence of evolution at all, but rather they are evidence of a design. Notice the poem, if you will, A Monkey's Viewpoint. I think it's interesting to consider the appendix, for example. We have an appendix, but a monkey, both Old World and New World monkeys, don't have an appendix. Now, if they are our nearest ancestors, then it's interesting they don't have one and we do. Because if the appendix is in fact something that we don't need, and it is something that somewhere down the line we'll be rid of, how come they already got rid of it? Are they more advanced than what we are? They've already dropped it. But we still have it. If we're more advanced than they are, then that doesn't make sense. But there are a lot of things, of course, that don't make sense. Consider the polo monkey's viewpoint. 3 monkeys sat in a coconut tree discussing things as they're said to be. Said one to the others, "Now listen, you two, there's a certain rumor that can't be true. That man descended from our noble race, the very idea, it's a dire disgrace. No monkey ever deserted his wife, starved his baby and ruined her life. And you've never known a mother monk to leave her baby with others to bunk, or pass them on from one to another till they hardly know who is their mother. And another thing you'll never see, a monk build a fence around a coconut tree and let the coconuts go to waste, forbidding all other monks a taste. Why, if I put a fence around this tree, starvation might encourage you to steal from me. Here's another thing a monk won't do, get out at night and drink him a few, or use a gun or a club or a knife to take some other monkey's life. Yes, man descended the ornery cuss, but brother, he didn't descend from us." That's interesting, isn't it? They don't have an appendix, but we do. Who descended from who based upon that? Now, evolutionists that keep up with the literature, who keep up with scientific discoveries, and they keep up with the human body and discoveries are made relative to the human body, they don't make this argument anymore. They don't make arguments based on these organs anymore. But you know where you'll still find them? In our children's textbooks. If we know it's not so, if it's been disproven, then why do they continue to appear in our textbooks? Because those who are in charge of our textbooks want our children to believe in evolution. And they believe by presenting these are things that a child could see. These are things that might convince a child. So we'll continue to put this out there. They'll be convinced by it. One of these days they may learn that this is not true, but by that time they will already believe in evolution. It will already be ingrained in their minds. It will already be a part of their lives, of their worldview. And the chances of them dropping it then are very, very slim. That's why it's still being done. Consider some other evidence for evolution. What about the Piltdown man? Most people are familiar with this find. It was found in Sussex, England, in the Piltdown area between 1909 and 1912. There were a number of fossils that were found, ape fossils, human fossils, as well as the fossils of other animals. In 1913, there was a skull that was found with an ape's jaw. This was heralded as one of the greatest finds of all time. A human skull with an ape jaw. Here's a transitional fossil. Here is an ape becoming a man. Here's what we've been looking for. Here is the missing link that we've been digging around for. But what was the problem with it? The problem with it was this. Those that discovered this put it together. And they made it appear more human than what it was. They connected the monkey's jaw to the human skull. They filed down the teeth in the monkey's mouth. Because monkey's teeth and our teeth are different. And they wanted the teeth to appear to be human. And so they filed them down to the point to where they were human looking. In fact, on one of the teeth, they went down too far and they had to do basically a root canal. They had to do some repair work and try to cover up what they had done. They even took this skull and they bathed it in acid because they wanted to give it the appearance of age. Come to find out, the human skull portion was from modern man, recent. and the other was clearly from a monkey. But they joined the two because they wanted to portray this missing link. We know today that that's not true. We know that this is not proof of evolution at all. But for 40 years, the most renowned evolutionists in the world told us that it was genuine. So for 40 years, there were generations of people being raised with the belief that evolution was true. When it was first discovered, it made its way into textbooks. And for 4 generations, it was taught as if it was truth. 40 years later, someone comes out and on the back page of some newspaper and says, oh, by the way, that's a hoax. It isn't true. 4 generations have been taught that it was. We know tonight that evolution is not true. But how many generations are going to be taught that it's true before anyone will ever put that on the front page? Before anyone will admit, you know, all we've been saying for all these years, that's not so. Is it going to wait till Judgment Day till that statement's made? How many generations are going to be taught a lie, believe a lie, teach the next generation a lie based on what these individuals are telling us that they know is not true? Think about Nebraska Man. It appeared on the front page of the London newspaper on June the 24th, 1922. And it's interesting that this picture of this half man, half monkey, you know what the artist based this drawing on? A tooth. I'm not a very good artist, but you give me a tooth, I could draw pretty much anything I want to draw. Couldn't you? Just a tooth. You haven't given me any bone structure. You haven't made me go in a certain direction with the legs or the arms or the skull or anything else. Just a tooth. So I start with a little tooth and then I draw everything I want to around it. I can pretty much draw anything I want to draw. And that's what was done. But you know, the old saying is a picture is worth 1,000 words. Once we get a picture into our brains, we very seldom ever get it out. It gets stored there. And so we get this picture in our brains of a half man, half monkey. It's just an artist's rendering. It was based just on a tooth. He didn't have anything else to go by, anything else to draw from, just a tooth. But here's what he drew from that, and here's what people saw. Here's the image that got stored away in their minds. Did you ever watch the television show Planet of the Apes? Did you ever watch that? Think about it for just a minute. Did you not just recall that image in your mind? These monkeys running around? Yeah, you did. Why? Because that image is stored up here. What if you didn't see that image on a television show that you knew was just a creation of Hollywood? What if you saw that picture and that picture was presented to you by a newspaper? That picture was presented to you by a teacher. That picture was presented to you by a scientist. Would it affect the way you saw it? Would it affect the impact it had on your brain? That's what happened. And it's become ingrained in people's minds as a result of it. Now, it's interesting that this Nebraska man became the basis for the Scopes trial. I hope at some point in the future we can talk about the Scopes trial that took place in Dayton, Tennessee. It was a test case. Tennessee had passed a law banning the teaching of evolution in schools. Imagine that. We're not going back that far. But Tennessee law said you cannot teach our kids evolution. Oh, I wish we had a law like that today. They had a law like that. You can't teach our kids evolution. You can't teach our kids this lie. You can't teach our kids that they came from monkeys. You can't teach them that. And so the ACLU wanted someone to challenge that law. And it was at a time where the Nebraska man, this tooth, had been discovered. People didn't go to Nebraska. They didn't see the find. They were just told that it had been found. They saw a picture, an artist's rendering of what it was like, and they based their judgment on that. People believed that it was true. People believed that this man had been found. And so this test case was carried through, and we know the end result of that. Evolution is taught in our schools today. Oh, and by the way, 5 years later, they found out that this tooth was a pig's tooth. It wasn't a man's tooth at all. Pig's tooth. But for 5 years, people believed they had found the missing link. The law was overturned, never to be reinstated. Evolution was now being taught in schools, never to be removed. All based on a lie. But it accomplished its purpose, and so we move merrily along. Consider as well another find, that of Lucy. Now this is more recent, November the 30th, 1974. It was a skeleton that was 40% complete. Well, that's more than, sometimes it's far more than a pig's tooth. Still, many bones are missing, but a few bones were found. This find was named Lucy because in the camp, on the night that the discovery was made, they were playing the Beatles, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And so this find was nicknamed Lucy. That's where she got her name from. Well, Lucy was touted as the missing link. There's some problems with Lucy. We haven't had that many years to work on this find as we have others. And what you will find is that scientists are far more restrictive of their finds than they used to be. When a find was discovered like Piltdown Man, scientists were allowed to examine it, study it, look at it. You're not going to get those opportunities today. No, scientists somewhere are going to find it, and it's going to be firmly within their control. They're going to tell you what they want you to know about it. You're a creationist? I want to look at it. Sorry, sir. This is only for especially highly trained scientists to view. So the opportunity to examine these things is not what it used to be. But here are some things that we've already determined from Lucy that create problems. She has curved fingers and ape-like proportions. She has locking wrists, which suggests that her ancestors walked on their knuckles. The wear on her teeth suggests that she was a fruit eater. Her rib cage is conical, like an ape's, not barrel-shaped like a human's. Other things resemble an ape, not a human. The pelvis of Lucy is not large enough to give birth, leaving one to wonder if she's a she at all. Perhaps she is a he. They're wrong about other things. Maybe they're wrong about that too. Now here is what an evolutionist had to say about this, and I think it's rather interesting. He was given a replica of Lucy, and so he started trying to put it together. He said, when I started to put the skeleton together, I expected it to look human. Everyone had talked about Lucy being very modern, very human. So I was surprised by what I saw. I noticed that the ribs were more round in cross-section, more like what you see in apes. Human ribs are flatter in cross-section, but the shape of the rib cage itself was the biggest surprise of all. The human rib cage is barrel-shaped, and I just couldn't get Lucy's ribs to fit this kind of shape. But I could get them to make a conical shape rib cage, like what you see in apes. Now, why do you think that Lucy's ribs wouldn't fit together like a human, but they would fit together like an ape? Do you think Lucy might be an ape and not a human? If her wrist looked like an ape, if all these other things about her looked like an ape, you think she might be an ape? Not a human, not a transitional fossil at all. But you know what we're doing with Lucy? She's right there in our textbooks. There for everybody to see, everybody to look at, everybody to study. Oh, and 30 years from now, 50 years from now, 60 years from now, we may come out with a disclaimer and say, oh, by the way, you know what? Lucy was just a monkey after all. We were wrong about it. Sorry about that. We've moved on to something else. How many generations are going to be told? Here's the proof. Here's what you've been asking for. Here's what you've been looking for. Here it is. And generation after generation is raised only one day for someone to learn, perhaps in an auditorium like this, that what they've been told all of their lives isn't true. But by that time, generation after generation has been taught that it is. You can go to the St. Louis Zoo, and you can see a model of Charles Darwin, a shrine really set up to him. You can see a replica of Lucy there. And she has human-looking fingers and toes. Now, the original find, there weren't any hands or feet. That didn't stop someone from recreating that. They just put hands on her. They just put feet on her. Maybe one of these days we'll learn that her fingers are like a monkey's and her toes are like a monkey's. But until then, we'll just keep her the way she is. And we'll let people continue to get this image in their minds. We'll let all these kids come through the zoo. We'll let all these kids see this. And for them to believe that evolution is true. We could go on and on and on tonight of additional claims after claim after claim after claim. The latest one that I know about is a fossil called Cadaba. In 2001, Time ran an article, front cover article, about man descending. We now know how man learned to walk upright. And it's based on Cadaba. Here's the interesting thing about that find. Bones were discovered over a 5-year period in 5 different locations. One of the bones was discovered 10 miles away. They've all been put back together and they've formed something. You collect bones over 5 years in 5 different locations, some of them as far away as 10 miles. I'm pretty sure you can build just about anything you want to build. Take a little bone fragment here, a little bone fragment there, and just start joining it up. Probably can make just about anything you want to out of it. That's the kind of proof that's out there for evolution. It isn't proof at all, but it is presented as proof. Our children are told that there is evidence for it. Pictures of artists' drawings are placed in their textbooks. Geologic timetables are spread out there. Evolutionary trees are shown there. They get in their mind, okay, here's how it is. Here's how it developed. Here's how it came about. Here's this discovery, and here's this discovery, and here's this discovery. And the embryos, you see the embryos of a salamander and the embryos of a human, they look alike at this stage of development. And so this must be true. But who's going to tell them it isn't true? Who's going to tell them all of this is a hoax? All of this is made up. All of this is a lie. And are we going to tell them it's a lie? As strongly, as boldly, and as repeatedly as what those in the school system are going to tell them it's the truth. And what those in college classrooms are going to tell them it's the truth. You see the battle that we're up against? Evolution is just like apples falling from a tree. It's just as settled, it's just as factual as what gravity is. That's what they're being told. It isn't true. But if we don't do something to give them the truth about human origins, the chances are they won't get that anywhere else. This is the only place they'll ever get that. We need to be aware, 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 20, of the oppositions of science, falsely so called. We need to be prepared to meet those things head on. There are so many good resources out there that I'm convinced every Christian parent ought to have. One is the book Convicted by Brad Harrop. I think you ought to have that book. I think if you have your child in public school and you do not have that book or another book like that, you're making a grave mistake. I'm not saying your child's going to be an evolutionist. I'm not contending that at all. But I'm saying you're making a grave mistake. If you're going to allow those evidences that we've talked about tonight to be put in their hands, you ought to at least allow this kind of evidence to be put in their hands. You ought to at least allow the material that's being presented by Apologetics Press and other organizations like that to be put into their hands. They're not going to get that any other place. Spend the money, invest, do whatever you have to do in this, and allow them to have this evidence. Just read it. Just look at it. I think you will see. I think unless you close your eyes and you stop your ears, it'll be obvious to you. Go through the effort to do that. Don't just assume that your children are going to believe it. Do everything within your power to make sure that they are presented with the truth of God's Word. Tonight, if you're not a Christian, we invite you to become one. We're asking you to respond to God in the way that God has revealed in His Word for you to do that. Now, the evidence is there that God exists. The evidence is there that there's design to this world. What do we know about God? What do we know about what God wants from us? That's largely revealed in this book. Oh, certain hints about the Creator may be found in nature, but if I really want to know God, I have to know this book. If I really want to be pleasing to God, I have to do what this book tells me to do. Are you willing tonight to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? John 3 and verse 16. Will you repent and turn away from your sins? Luke 13, 3 and 5. Will you confess Christ as the Son of God? Romans 10, 9 and 10. Be immersed in water for the remission of every sin. Acts 2 and verse 38. If you're a child of God tonight, will you live faithfully to God, boldly take a stand for Him in this world, reject the lies of Satan? Will you do that? Will you be faithful unto the point of death? Revelation 2 and verse 10. Here's your opportunity tonight, if you've been unfaithful, to be restored as we stand and as we sing.